Hi, I'm Alastair Somerville. I'm sorry I can't be with you live today because I'm driving through France to go on holiday. Anyway, I'm glad to be part of the project and I'm glad to have been invited by APE to talk to you about accessibility. So just for this opening chat, I'm going to talk about a bit of what I've done in my life, some of the issues I have with the way in which people think about accessibility, and then I'm going to talk to you about what I would like you to do before we have a chat later, either this month or next month. Anyway, just to start. So, I come from a family which has historically been in manufacturing, and I was the last generation of my family to run the business. So in about the mid 2000s I had to close down our factory, and when I chose to do something different, I chose to go into three-dimensional printing specifically for museums. And what the projects I mostly ended up doing in those days, in the early days, was making replicas of objects for handling, for giving to people, mostly blind and visually impaired people of objects which the museum had, so that they could explain better what the objects were or what the history was. So a lot of what my early experiences of accessibility were about framing the idea of communicating better through technology. And over time and through a lot of projects, I've worked with many people and in many places on the idea that accessibility is about technology. So I've worked with virtual reality, global positioning, satellite system guidance systems, three-dimensional audio, many different forms of technology, all of which have then been tested and implemented mostly in terms of checklists. i.e., we check whether the thing is accessible against a checklist which is mostly about talking about human impairments, i.e. factors to do with senses, cognition, etc. The problem is with this is it's not good accessibility. If you trap accessibility in the idea that you can solve it either through checklists or through technology, then you're actually going to fail people with disabilities. One of the most important pieces of research I ever came across was a discussion about why places are inaccessible. And it was, because I work in museums a lot, it was to do with museums. It was a discussion that though museums are lovely, and museums are full of lovely people and lovely objects, and much of the time museums are physically accessible. There are ramps, there are all of these things which are in the checklists. However, museums don't have disabled people in them. They're not there. However accessible the experiences are, however accessible the information is, however accessible the technologies used are, the people are not there. So there is clearly a barrier of accessibility in existence which is creating problems. And what the research was talking about is that for many people with disabilities, the accessibility barrier is that they do not feel invited or welcomed into different places. They do not feel it's worth even beginning the journey to go to the place, to use the technology, to use the product, to use the service. They never start. They're never there. And this is why when I talk to people about accessibility, I talk about the invitations and the welcomes. Because what you do at the start of your project, how you talk to people at the start of your project, affects whether they will ever end up using the product or service that you're developing. If you don't do the stuff at the beginning, when you release the product or service at the end, they're not going to use it. Now, I know that in the first part of the project, you've been working on ideas of service design, and I do like service design. And the ideas within service design of user journeys, user stories, maps, all of these things. And they're very good, useful artifacts to have. But what I'm going to talk to you about is breaking them apart now. I want you to think about how to smash the things that you've just made. Because what I want to talk to you about is content design. Now, content design is the idea that you work through how you communicate, how you build your product, by thinking about how you write and describe it. The content that goes into the website, the content that goes into the project, technologies. And within content design, there's an idea called chunking, which is a horrible word in English and probably is a horrible word in German. But what chunking is about is taking all of the ideas you've written down, all the stories, all the things, and breaking them into smaller and smaller fragments. Because if you can break the stories into smaller fragments, if you can break the maps into smaller pieces, what you're doing is creating easier fragments to translate and communicate with more people from different backgrounds or different ideas and knowledge. These are the ways you make invitations, by creating gaps in your stories, gaps in your maps, so that other people can come in, that other people can come and talk to you. If you are able to do that, then you are accessible, because you are actually creating gaps to invite people and welcome people so that they can tell their stories, they can tell their ways of their reactions to your projects. So what this is about is fundamentally thinking about all of the material you have at the moment and how can you actually take it and break it into smaller stories, smaller chapters. Think about the idea of creating a children's book. Simple words, short chapters. Practice telling your project story to each other so that you can actually create stories that make sense in the smallest amount of words, in the simplest number of words. These are the fragments, these are the things which then are made possible to retell the story in different formats. Your text can become audio, your audio can become video, your visuals can become tactile, your stories that you describe on a website can become stories that can become created on a TikTok. Fragments and blocks make it easier to communicate in a way which is more comprehensible and more inviting to more people. This way of using content design is the way in which you create accessible projects. So the question I have for you to start with, and which I will be talking to you when we talk and meet with each other, is can you take the stuff you have now and break it into smaller chunks? Think about it almost like Lego. We break the things apart in order to reassemble them in order to invite more people to play with us. I'll share my Calendly link with Abhay so that you can contact me, you can see where my diary and where I'm free. But I'm really happy to talk to you. But what I would like to start with is talking simply about what you want to do, who you want to work with, and what you want to achieve. Anyway,